GST India Role and Recommendation of Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, presented by Niriksha, MCom Final, MPM Government First Grade College Karkala, Mangalore University. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development forecast a deeper contraction of 10.2% for India in the current fiscal, surpassing its June estimate of minus 7.3% in the event of second wave of infections in its interim economic outlook report, while the OECD raised its expectations for global output to minus 4.5% in 2020 against minus 6% earlier based, largely on improvements in China and US. It cited the prolonged spread of the virus for the downgrade in India's growth. In the event of second wave of infection, it's surpassing its June estimate of minus 7.3%. In India, its growth goes downgrade because of the spread of the virus. And also the report said, in contrast, the output declines in 2020 are projected to be even deeper than anticipated earlier in the Argentina, India, Mexico and South Africa, reflecting the prolonged spread of the virus. High level of poverty and informality and strict confinement measures for an extended period. It projected a sharp bounce back to 10.7% growth in next fiscal for India, along with similarly high figure for other countries in 2021. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Economic Survey India 2019. India has been a growth champion in recent years and has succeeded in taming inflation, the current account deficit and non-performing loans. India's participation in the global economy has risen with outstanding performance in some services, while the largest diaspora in the world is an asset in developing new markets. India has also lifted many millions of people out of poverty and has made access to housing for all priority. Ambitious structural reforms including better targeted household support, financial inclusion initiatives, the implementation of goods and services tax, the insolvency and bankruptcy code, the new approach to federalism and the corporate income tax reform have played a key role. The recent economic slowdown and still large number of poor and underemployed people call for renewed impetus on structural reform. Priority include creating fiscal space to finance more and better physical and social infrastructure, in particularly health and education, modernizing labor laws to remove disincentives for firms to create jobs and employ women, continuing to improve financial sector's health, further reducing restriction to trade, and improving property rights and rent regulation to achieve better housing for all. In its Economic Survey of India, the OECD expressed optimism about growth, but cautioned that there are risks to the outlook. The Paris-based Intergovernmental Economic Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has said that creation of quality jobs, underemployment, and income inequality remain challenges in India. In recent years, India has been a growth champion and succeeded in taming inflation and the current account deficit, non-performing loans, and also India's participation in the global economy has risen with outstanding performance in some services. India has also lifted many millions of people out of poverty and has made access to housing for all priority. Cooperation between India and the OECD has increased over the year. India is now able to contribute to the work agenda of the organization in areas such as taxation and fiscal affairs, competition policy, and financial education and literacy, etc. Next observation. In this observation based on economic survey, India's tax revenue as a percentage of GDP is the lowest among BRICS nations and is quite low compared to the OECD average. Here, BRICS means Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. India's tax revenue quite low compared to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. India's overall tax revenue is 16.8% of GDP, whereas other BRICS nations stand at Brazil 33.4%, Russia 28.2%, China 24.8%, and South Africa 27.8%. And OECD averages 34.2% of GDP. The personal income tax revenue is low and has a limited redistributive impact. In support of these findings, the report quotes the following statistics. The survey indicates that personal income tax contributes merely 2.20% to the GDP in India, whereas the average contribution of OECD members is approximately 9%. Only 5.6% of the total population pays personal income tax due to a large zero rate tax bracket and exemption for agriculture income. The Hindu undivided family category of taxpayer offers those with substantial property income an avenue to reduce their tax liability and complicates implementation of inheritance tax. Next, the liability for the well-off are reduced through deduction for principal and interest repayment for housing loan. And India's corporate tax rate coupled with tax on dividend result in high tax liability as compared to international standard and proves to be major obstacle for business development and attracting foreign investment. India's corporate tax rate coupled with tax on dividend result is high tax liability, so it is attract the foreign investment. The number of tax dispute is extensive and about 40% of the total go through the court system. Next, recommendations. The report states that while the tax to GDP ratio is low, meeting social and development needs will require raising more revenue from property and personal income taxes. Since few people pay income taxes and property tax, the tax system has little redistributive impact. The report makes certain significant recommendations to improve the tax to GDP ratio as under. The distribution dividend tax should be replaced by a traditional withholding tax system. Here, a withholding tax is an amount that an employer withholds from employees' wages and pays directly to the government. The amount withheld is a credit against the income tax the employee must pay during the year. And the dividend distribution tax is tax levied on dividends that a company pays to its shareholder out of its profit. And non-resident tax rate should be aligned with tax rates applicable to Indian residents. Next, inheritance tax should be introduced with a relatively high exemption threshold and low rates. Here, inheritance tax is a tax paid by a person who inherit money or property of a person who has died. Next, tax compliance should be incentivized, that is by the securing access to service such as life insurance to those filing tax return. Next, agriculture income of rich farmers should be subject to tax. This will also assist in reducing the possibility of tax evasion through categorization of non-agriculture income as agricultural income. Here, rich farmers' agriculture income must be subject to tax. The income threshold and tax rate structure should be brought in line with other emerging economies so that tax paid at higher rates start kicking in at a lower income level. Most tax expenditures or exemption should be eliminated as these benefit mostly the rich and high income individuals. Next, audit process should be improved to reduce the number of and length of tax disputes. Audit process should be improved to reduce the number of tax disputes and the length of tax disputes. And the number of employees in the tax function and their training should be improved. So overall, India's participation in the global economy is high and rising with outstanding performance in some services. Ambitious reforms have been passed. Implementing them fully would boost incomes and well-being. And addressing domestic structural bottlenecks is the key to supporting India's competitiveness. Thank you for watching.